This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Greg Wadley, Clear Roads Administrator with CTC & Associates. We're here today for our first implementation webinar of 2024 on the Accumulated Winter Season Severity Index, or AWSSI. I'm going to turn it over to Brian Byrne of Maine DOT. So, Brian, it's all yours.
All right, thanks a lot, Greg. As Greg said, I'm Brian Byrne. I'm the Highway Maintenance Engineer with Maine DOT. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Accumulated Winter Season Severity Index, otherwise known as the AWSSI. And just a second. Apparently my controls. There we go. All right. What I'm going to do is I'll give you a little bit of background about the AWSSI, and as I talk about some of the things that the enhancements that Clear Roads helped out with, I'll talk about how Maine DOT uses those enhancements. So that'll be the implementation part of it all. But we'll go through a little bit of background just to make sure everybody's up to speed with what this tool does for us. Midwestern Regional Climate Center is the one that developed the AWSSI. Don't know exactly when they first developed it, but I think I came across it from a New York State report. It was a winter report that a previous Clear Roads member named Mike Lashmet had shared. And this little graph that you see in the bottom left-hand corner just kind of caught my eye in the report. It was a very clear way of showing how a winter season was progressing against the backdrop of how the severity would be for that location. So it was just a really neat, simple, I guess I'll say, very clear graph that I thought would be pretty useful to use in Maine DOT's reports. So I started looking into it a little bit more. And as I tried to use the tool and things, I got thinking about other enhancements that would be good to see. And that's kind of how we got into talking about it at Clear Roads. And we came up with a couple of tasks that are a couple of projects that added a few more features to it. So we'll go through those today. This is the this address that you see. I've added, that's not on their webpage like that, but I stuck it there so you can very easily get out to go to this website. If you want any more information about the AWSSI, this little box over on the right that says About AWSSI, click on that. There's a fact sheet in there, and it's pretty clear and to the point, so I'd recommend going out and using that if you're not familiar with this. So the goals of the AWSSI are to objectively index winter conditions, use commonly available data. Maximum temperature, snowfall, and snow depth are the three things that are being used. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. It creates a historical database of AWSSI for any location with available information in those three areas. It allows comparisons of season-to-season severity at one location in the context of the climatology of that specific location. And you can also compare between locations as well because the numbers are all relative. It uses a baseline to scale subjective impacts, such as those to snow removal, commerce, and transportation, which is why it's important for us. So the AWSSI starts when there's a first measurable snowfall of greater than or equal to a tenth of an inch, maximum temperature at or below 32 degrees or just December 1st. And it ends with the last measurable snowfall of that amount, and last day with 1 inch of snow on the ground, last day with a maximum temperature of 32 degrees, or February 28th, 29th if the above has occurred. So basically they calculate the score for a given location based on the temperature, snowfall, and snow depth thresholds. The components are computed separately, then they're added together for a total index at that location. And it's accumulated throughout the winter season. This is day by day that they're doing this, allowing a running total of winter severity during a season, as well as a final cumulative value. In most of the locations, you can get information all the way back to 1950-1951 season. The data is subject to quality control, so seasons missing data that would contribute to 5% or more of the season's AWSSI are removed. and averages and standard deviations are calculated. Now, when you look at that graph, you can see that the quintiles are all there. You've got the 0 to 20% for the bottom part, which is this is the graph that's up there right now is from 2021 Maine Farmington station, and that was a very mild season at that point. And you'll see that the orange bar above that is the next quintile, which is at a moderate season. The greenish or yellowish one is the average season. Above that, the blue is severe, and then the purple is an extreme season. So if you find your or as the seasons are calculated, or each day's numbers are calculated, it's going to fall into whatever quintile is it calculates out to be for that area. So the pros and cons of the AWSSI, it's readily available data. It's consistent methodology nationwide, and they do all the work and you get the results, which is really nice. But of course, everything's a trade-off. The downside is that it's only based on temperature and snowfall and snow depth. So a lot of cold without snow can skew the ratings, at least for our purposes, because we're most interested in what's going to use salt and take plowing effort and things of that nature. And icing and winds are not represented in any way. So when you find variations in how your hours of your equipment or people or how much materials you've used are not necessarily consistent from one year to the next, one of those things might very well be that you had more icing or less icing or more wind or less wind or something like that. But overall, most years seem to average out fairly well, and I've got some graphs that I'll show you in a little while. So I mentioned that Clear Roads had 2 enhancement projects where we worked with the MRCC to enhance AWSSI. And the first one that we did was a 2016 project that I think finished up in 2019 or something like that. So it basically had 4 tasks involved. And the first one was to add at least one additional AWSSI location to each Clear Road state. One of the challenges they have is finding weather stations where the data is consistently reported, day in and day out, year after year, and it's done that for the last 50 years or so. So there's not a lot of those around in a lot of cases. So sometimes, you wish you had a station in a different spot, but nobody's ever collected the data in that spot, so you're not going to have it. But at this time, they only had a few locations across the country, and we were just looking to add more, so that was one of the taskings. Task 2 was to add the ability to overlay past years on the current year AWSSI time series plot. So this would give you the availability to say something like, I know that the winter 07-08 was a really bad winter. How does the current winter look compared to that? And how did it progress from this point forward, or things like that? So you could just make some comparisons. So we wanted to add that. We wanted to display projected information for the remainder of the winter season. So what that's doing is, as you're tracking through, it's plotting out how your winter's proceeding day by day. And then at some point you might want to go, is this winter going to get worse? Is it going to get lighter? Is it, how do we think it might track, and how does it look compared to past winters that were winters similar to this winter or just the most recent winters? So they added some features for that. And then the fourth part was, or the fourth task was to determine the feasibility of an augmented road AWSSI tool. So what this kind of came from was we started thinking, well, the things that affect the DOT is that whenever it snows or something like that, we have to get out there and treat the roads. So it's not so much on the cold side of things, because the AWSSI, if you've got cold temperatures, it's still going to mark the winter as more and more severe as it's colder and colder. But that's not necessarily doing much for us if there's no precipitation. So we were looking at a way to maybe come up with a road AWSSI tool, and something that would be kind of more tailored to our things. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. One thing I will tell you is that the final report that Steve Hilberg and Mike Timlin did for this first AWSSI project gets into the details of the road AWSSI, and they looked at data from several different states. I think it was Arizona, Idaho, Maine, Maryland, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania. And they went through quite a bit of work, and he talks about that in a lot of depth. So if you really want to get into the road AWSSI and understand it a little bit better, I'd suggest going back to that project and watching that final closeout report. And then after that was completed, a couple of years later, we came back and did another phase 2 project. And what that one did was to add additional stations again, to update the AWSSI seasonal total map so that it would come right up through the season at the time, 2019 to 2020. And then add download of current season daily values. So I'll show you where you can get that afterwards. And user selected historical seasons. So we had already added some historical seasons with the first project. What this one was going to do was allow you to pick like 5 seasons that, 5 specific seasons that you wanted. So here's just a shot of some of the stations that were in place at certain times. So you can see the 2018 map in the top left over there. And there was a few, they were kind of sparse. And then with the first project, we added what you see in the 2020. And then in the last or the second project, phase 2, it got to what you see on the left, on the right right now. So that's what you'll see on their website now. One of the things that you'll notice is that there's the stations, they get colored based on, how severe the winter is, and it's been fairly mild you can tell with the red, it's a fairly mild winter for this past year. And but the gray ones, those are typically co-op stations because you've got different quality type stations, and some of them are like airports or National Weather Service stations. So they have a lot of data collected on a very regular basis. The co-op stations are more based on volunteers doing this, and sometimes they only report on a monthly basis. So you'll see them go gray, and then when the monthly report comes in, it should catch back up. I think in a couple of cases, like that Farmington one that you see over in Maine, it's the gray one in amongst all the red. And that one, the person who'd been doing it for years passed away, but somebody else picked it up and had gone through it this past winter, but it's still showing gray. So we need to look into how some of those might stall out and then not come back online, because we seem to see a lot of them over on the western side of the country. So this is a image of this is the Jackman station in Maine, and the black line is the current winter, and it was taken obviously right around the first part of May. And then all these colored lines are the different years that you see in the legend over here to the left. And it's just showing those historical winters. So you can tell that the 2018-2019 winter was an extreme winter at this location, whereas the current winter with the black line is tracking in the mild location. And all the rest of them were pretty well in the moderate area. So I had mentioned that the second phase 2 part, we came along and added in the ability to pick specific seasons. So what that gave you was these drop downs at each of these where you can select each of those years that you would like to see all the way across there. So basically the way Maine DOT uses this is just as you would expect. Typically there's certain winters that stick out in our minds in certain areas for certain reasons. Maybe we used a lot more resources. Maybe we, had to rely on a lot of extra staffing or try to call in other people or things of that nature. And we might want to compare how that season's tracking versus a similar season, or to how the current season is looking compared to ones in recent memory, and just if there's any trends in recent years and things like that. So the projected season, this one, the image that's on here, it wasn't projected until later in the season, so you can see that it's pretty well guaranteed that this season is going to be a moderate season, or it was basically. But you can use this tool at any point. You can be using it in early February if you want. You're just going to see a lot more variation. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can look at the most recent 5 seasons, the most recent 10 seasons, or you can choose the 5 seasons or 10 seasons that are closest to the current Aussie score. Now, I think that one's probably the one that I use more often, just because you seem to get into a certain weather pattern. And if you're really getting hammered at the first part of the year, it tends to usually keep hammering you pretty well. Sometimes you get some drastic variability that kicks in, but a lot of times, they kind of, if it's going to be one type of winter, it kind of is that type of winter. So the one that's the current Aussie score picks up from where the current year is tracking, and then it takes and graphs out what each of the winters that were found to be near that score, how they proceeded from that point forward. So I think that gives you a little bit of an idea of how things could go, or it at least gives you a way to look at it and say, okay, the odds of this becoming more severe at this point in time are 50-50, or maybe 25% or something. So you can just kind of get a sense of where things could go. It helps you with some of your planning. So one of the other things that I mentioned that we did was, or that we worked with MRCC to do, was to update this the seasonal total map. And you can see that they had a 1980 to 2014 map that's on the bottom left there. And in the top left there was a project that Clear Roads had done back in 2010, was about mapping weather severity zones. So that we put together before we even knew about the Aussie, and you can kind of see how they're pretty consistent with each other. So that was pretty useful tool, and we did another project that enhanced that one. But with this task 2, what we did was we had MRCC update that with the current data so that it went from 1980 to 2020. So you can kind of get a sense of, how winters typically go, depending on what part of a state or, where you are in the nation. Again, that's a useful tool that, just something that's really not even directly winter related. It was a conversation I was having yesterday with a striping company that does retroreflectivity testing. And they were talking about doing some testing in another state, and how they were identifying the painted lines that could last another year versus lines that had to be repainted and things like that. And a map like this is useful to give you an idea of whether or not that the areas they were testing were in a very severe winter area or not, and how that might compare to the data that they were collecting. Because of course, the quality of your striping is directly dependent on how many times you drag a carbide blade across it. So if you've got an area that is, not getting a lot of plowing action on your lines, of course, the line should hold up a lot better. So you can kind of take things like that and compare results to other areas and get a sense of whether or not your own data might be better or worse using a tool like this. So on the website, all this data that they're collecting, whether it's daily data or whether it's seasonal data, it can all be downloaded, and you just go out to their Aussie webpage and you scroll down below the map, and you could just pick out whichever thing you're looking for. The climatology map you can see is down there towards the bottom. You can download the current winter's daily data, or you can go down and just collect the previous season, or you can just get a whole summary of what's out there. One of the things that I think you guys all recognize this, of course, it's the Clear Roads state winter maintenance data and statistics. This is a very popular. A lot of people that I've told to go to the Clear Roads website and get this information. They come back really impressed that Clear Roads has gone through the effort to put together all this comprehensive data and share it out to the public like that. And one of the things that has been done is this has been enhanced to incorporate the AWSSI data with the winter data. So that gives you the ability to take some of your material usage or your hours, your labor hours or your equipment hours, and compare them to the AWSSI scores and just see how they compare from one year to the next. And this is just showing that when you open up the Clear Roads winter data spreadsheet, if you go over to tab 6, it's got the AWSSI, the average AWSSI and state and city scores. And this particular one is showing 2015 through 2016 winter up through the 22-23 winter. And these are the stations that are in the AWSSI over here on the left. And the final seasonal score is run right down. And it gives you an average for it too. I tend to tweak mine a little bit from this just because the Farmington one is a little bit unreliable, as I said. That one sometimes falls out, so I don't want to have some years where I include it and some years where I don't, because one of the things you got to do is if you're going to do this from year to year and use the data to compare, you need to be consistent, of course. So pick the stations that best represent an average in your state and then apply them consistently year after year. The other reason I don't use just the full average here is that it's a little bit heavily weighted towards the more severe areas of our state. So you've got Caribou, Fort Kent, and Jackman, which are all pretty severe, and they will tend to pull our statewide averages to make it look like the winter was a little bit worse than it was. So I try to just use Caribou because that one's a National Weather Service station. I use Bangor because that one's an airport. I skip Fort Kent. I use Jackman because that one seems to have pretty consistent data. And it's in one of our severe areas over in the western part of the state, which was underrepresented before that station existed. And then, of course, Portland's down at the Portland airport, I believe. So that one is also very reliable. So then if you take your average score that you're using from the AWSSI and you figured out what stations you're going to use, you can then now just basically use that as a denominator to pretty much anything you want to compare. You can look at your labor hours, you can look at your equipment hours, and in this particular case, we're looking at rock salt usage. So this one's just tons of rock salt plotted against the average AWSSI score for the stations I mentioned from the winter of 03-04 all the way up through the current winter. And you can see that they correlate quite well all the way across. Some areas, the jump on the AWSSI might be a little more significant than you would see in the salt usage. But that could be represented by, like I said, maybe it was just a little bit colder winter and the snow wasn't there to match. So you didn't see as much of a jump with the salt. And then you could take and do that same thing, but just include other information on the same graph. This particular graph is really busy, but what it's showing is the bars across the bottom are showing the red is representing the amount of salt that was used. The green represents the amount of sand that we used. The blue is the AWSSI score, and the purple is the average number of storms. So that's another thing that we track. Maine has 48 crews across the state, and whenever we report our winter efforts, they have to be reported against a storm. So they have to create a storm event, and then they charge the materials, the labor, and the equipment and everything else against it. So along through the winter, I averaged those 48 crews in the storms they reported to get a representation of how many storm events we had. There is in the data, in the AWSSI data, there's also a column that gives you a storm count, um, amongst the road AWSSI score and amongst the regular AWSSI score. Sometimes it counts a little bit higher than what we have here. And I think it's just that it's counting maybe days separate, days where snowfall occurred separately. Whereas if 2 days in a row are snowing, we're going to call them one event. And so there's going to be some differences like that. But that's something to check out if you want to look at how to maybe compare your own data. So you can not only use the AWSSI score or the road AWSSI score, you can take a look at the actual number of events that were claimed for that winter. So that is just my quick overview, and I'd be happy to get into any questions that people might have.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I didn't get any questions or hand raises during the presentation, so now's the time. You can either type it into the chat box if you want, but probably just better to speak right up. Clay's got his hands up. Go ahead, Clay.
Brian, on one of the early slides, it looked like it showed it started on December 1st and ended February 28th and 29th, but your graphs seem to cover from October to April. So do they cover the full winter now?
Yeah, so let's see let's go to like this one here.
No, it was like one of your first slides when you were doing the background. Sorry to make you go back.
It's all right, no problem. No problem at all. Oops.
There. Nope. Go back, forward one.
Forward one, okay. Forward one more. We're back.
There.
Here, okay.
Begins.
Goals of the AWSSI. Oh, the begins thing was the next one, wasn't it? Yeah, right here. Okay. Yeah, so what happens is it'll begin whenever any of these things happen. So the December 1st is like the call it the safety. If those other two things don't happen, it's just going to start on December 1st. But on both ends of the winter, at least in Maine, we are beginning, before December 1st, and we're going typically until somewhere in mid-April is the more likely ending date for all of our stations. So that's going to be highly specific to the specific station that you're talking about as to whether or not the December 1st actually does define when it starts or whether one of the other things causes it to start earlier. Does that make sense?
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
All right, Scott Simons.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just had a quick question, and I don't think I missed it, but I may have. What creates the parameters for each station? And what I mean by that is I saw where it said mild, something, average, severe, and extreme,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
how the bar was run through those settings. Um, are the parameters the same for each one, or are
No.
they different and then rolled up into like a season ending average?
Yeah.
Does
So
that make sense?
these. Yeah, I think so. I'll answer it, and then you tell me if I'm missing what you're asking. But if you look at the like just the shape of this particular set of colors and everything here, what this is saying is that for the main Farmington station, if you look back across all the data since I think like most of them are from 1950, from 1950 to today, those graphs will basically form this whole shape of all of them.
Okay.
And the bottom 20% are going to be defining this pinkish area. The next 20 to 40% are going to define the orange area. The next 40 to 60% is going to form the yellow area. and so on. You know what I mean? So the 80 to 100% most severe winter graphs will fall into this purple area for the Farmington station only. So this shape does not exist at any other station. It's unique to its location based on past data. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. So basically the 20% chunk, I'll use them just chunks,
Yep.
has the parameters are set for this location, meaning a mild winter here would be 10 inches of snow for 20%. A moderate would be 20 inches of snow, 30 inches, and so on based on the percentage of the category and the
Yeah.
percentile. So every one of these graphs is different based
Right.
on previous history, and then that's
Yeah.
rolled up into the statewide
Right. Right.
output.
So
Oh,
an
okay, okay,
average winter in this location
gotcha.
is going
Okay,
to be
okay,
significantly different from an average winter in, say, location towards the southern part of the country. You know what I mean?
okay. That's what I thought. That's what it was. I wanted to make sure that because I'm thinking like something like this for us would be kind of hard to do with the beach and the mountains, and because it's so dynamic from one end to the other. And
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
okay,
Yeah, and every state's really going to have that kind of a situation. Like, so if you look at a Portland graph, for example, Portland in Maine, it's in southern Maine, it's towards the coast, it gets moderated by the ocean temperatures and things.
yeah, right,
And then
yeah,
you compare that to, say, Jackman, which is western Maine, up in the mountains,
yep, yep,
and
yep.
just gets snow all the time. Very different
Cool,
winters, and that's why it's important to kind of, well, it's tough. It's tough in one regard because if you don't have a station anywhere near the place where you're trying to make some comparisons, you're just out of luck.
right.
It's just unfortunate. But it's important to just make sure you're using a station that's as close to what you can get and that it represents things as best you can. New Hampshire has a station that's up on top of Mount Washington, and that's pretty extreme and well beyond anything that they'd probably want to represent. So they wouldn't want to include that station in any of their averages when they're doing
Gotcha.
graphs and things.
I find it interesting that the salt usage, even though it was a state that it looked like the salt usage wasn't broken down by location, it was more like a statewide. And I find it very, very kind of actually interesting that the salt usage was consistent, even with these parameters set at a local level and then all rolled up into an average, that the salt usage line trend line kind of followed that. So that's kind of cool. Kind of
Yeah,
that's why I was
yeah,
wondering how far in the weeds it was broken down. But then when you just have a statewide average, I'm assuming that isn't broken down to the location. It's just an average across the state.
right,
Maybe not
exactly.
by specific locale or specific um station, but maybe like specific garage, but it seems like it was kind of cool that it followed it. So that's all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is kind of you're generalizing to a certain extent. In a way, you're generalizing with the winter with by using the Aussie. Of course, if you're, because icing is a fairly significant thing for us, and I know that wind is a significant thing for the Midwest and stuff like that. So, but yeah, you're right. It has, just even though we are just averaging, using total salt amount and averaging stations together, and then kind of dividing one by the other and comparing them um, you it still just kind of comes out. It was kind of neat how it worked out in the end. But
Yeah.
you can drill down, of course, and get a crew area or a region. And if they've got a station that's pretty unique to them, then you can try to refine the data a little bit more.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. I'm not seeing any. So yeah, this recording will be available on the ClearRoads website. I think what I'm going to do is create an area. We already have an area for videos. I'm going to include an area for implementation webinars there as well. So it might take a little bit longer. Next week, we'll get it uploaded next week. at the latest, and I'll notify everybody when that's done. So, Brian, do you have anything else before we sign off?
Oh, I think I'm all set. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah,
Oh,
really appreciate it, Brian.
actually,
Yeah.
I do have one more thing. Congratulations to Clear Roads for winning that Excellence Award. It's,
yeah,
pretty
well,
big.
that was that was pretty. We're all pretty proud of that, and obviously through your work as chair and others and everybody, all 39 members, it was definitely well deserved. So yeah, appreciate that. All right, well, everyone is offering their congratulations and thanks to you, Brian. So thank you again very much. Congrats on your upcoming retirement and enjoy yourself. And are you going to maintain the one of the stations in your area? Is that what you're going to do in retirement?
My retirement's more of a partial retirement. I'm going to be doing a lot of
Okay.
other things and not putting my feet up just yet, just doing something different.
Okay.
So,
Excellent.
thanks.
All right, Brian. Well, thank you, and thank you everybody else, and have a great weekend.
All right.
See you,
See you
Brian.
later. Bye.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks a lot.
I'll be seeing Bruce in about probably 20 minutes.